Let's get out of like the circling of the sharks in the ocean and create that tide pool. What are we focusing on? Where are the pockets that are doing things really, really well? And let's figure out what's happening there. Let's find a pocket where maybe things aren't going so well. And it's really going to help us kind of create this cohort or a triangulation of where to focus, really creating a very targeted approach.
You're listening to HR Superstars, a podcast brought to you by 15Five. On this show, we talk to strategic people leaders who are making a meaningful impact in their organizations and shaping the future of work. So get ready to be inspired and discover the secrets behind building high-performing teams and fostering a culture of growth and thriving. The future of HR starts here. I want to welcome and thank all of you so much for joining us here today for this conversation. I'm Karina Young, VP of People at 15Five, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you all and my two guests to dig into one of what's really the biggest opportunity I see for the people function, which is manager enablement. I want to start with something that's very real for a lot of us. Managers have hit max capacity, and that's beyond bandwidth. I'm talking about the whole bubble of responsibilities and complexities that they navigate in today's workplace. They're leading hybrid teams. They need to find efficiencies and navigate emerging tech. We want them to raise the bar on performance. We want them to support well-being, juggle constant change, and be our partners in driving better engagement, performance, and retention. So as expected, manager development has fast moved up the list of our HR strategic priorities, which means they're a key focus of our goals and our programs much more than they've been in the recent past. We as HR teams have to design training, curate content, answer questions, and do our best to make sure that managers are set up to succeed. But like our managers, we're often doing it without enough time, resources, or a clear playbook. Sometimes it feels like we might be Atlas carrying the world, which is the managers carrying their own little world on top of it, and that can feel really heavy. Gartner's data has a lot of really interesting insight when it comes to manager development. They show that 75% of HR leaders like us say their managers are overwhelmed, and 70% of HR leaders say that their current programs aren't preparing managers enough for the future. On the upside, Gartner also shared that even with engagement at a low point right now overall for organizations, small bursts of manager development can actually cut disengagement in half. So we know the problem, we see the opportunity. How do we actually bridge this gap without falling into the ravine as people leaders, right? Many of us are asking questions like, how do we make manager support simpler, more scalable, more impactful? How do we know what to prioritize? How do we help our managers right now? How do we build something custom, or do we invest in something proven? What's the right solution? Lots and lots and lots of questions. And that's what we're going to dive in here today. I'm going to turn it over to Yen and Morgan to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their journey. And I want to know for each of you, what was a standout moment in your own development journey? So Yen, I'm going to hand it to you first.
Hello, my name is Yen. I was previously co-founder at Kona, the AI tool for manager enablement. For 5 years, I studied management and remote management at that and all the difficulties, challenges. We chatted with over 1,700 managers and HR leaders and counting, released annual reports, and 5 years with a whole pandemic to boot. Management, newsflash, is very, very difficult to get right. And so trying to study how we can support managers with tooling, support, and also people and an entire support system, that's been my obsession, essentially. I'm based out of slightly overcast Los Angeles today. And yeah, just very, very happy to be here. My fun fact / story learning moment. I've read a lot of the books behind me. If you're a leadership development nerd like myself, you'll see a lot of familiar titles. But you don't really learn as hard as when you completely botch it. And so I thought I was being nice. I did the classic withholding feedback. And as it turns out, performance, when it started to dip, me breaking the news was a huge surprise for that person. And I was like, oh, I read it in radical candor and I did the thing. I was ruinously empathetic. What the heck? So as easy as it is to read books, as easy as it is to talk about it, it's really hard to get right.
Appreciate the honesty. And I think that's, I'm sure a lot of us have been in that exact same spot. Morgan, introduce yourself for us.
My name is Morgan Webb. I am in sunny, not quite humid yet, Charlotte, North Carolina, where I have been for most of my adult life. I started my career actually in education, moved into financial services, And I've now spent over a decade working in HR. I joke that I used to pack the swag bags for recruiting events, and that got me noticed. I was like, hey, I could create this great opportunity and experience. And then it moved into all things employee engagement, manager effectiveness, leadership development, performance management. All of that happened prior to coming to 15.5. One of my sort of stories is that I had this epiphany, probably too late, that I probably should not have been a leader. I was 24, 25, doing a really awesome job, and I was promoted to being a manager. And I thought that was like the epitome of my career. I wasn't supported with training. I probably didn't know how to lead people. I should not have been leading people at the time. It took me a few years to finally come to that realization. And I'll be honest, it was such a great step back to say, let me be an individual contributor and let me help individuals with what I needed the most and help to inform and educate. But yeah, I look back now and think, what did I like? What? I really thought I should be leading people at 24 and 25. I don't even know if I knew how to like balance my checkbooks and apply for a mortgage at the time. But no. And I think that's really shaped who I am and how I show up in the HR space ever since that realization.
I want to start by talking about, right, our HR reality. We talk a lot about the manager reality, articles, posts, we read about it, we know the data of what they're doing and other complexities, but I want to give airtime to our reality. What do we find ourselves in when it comes to leading manager enablement, right? So many of us end up finding ourselves in the seat of leading, creating, navigating training without the background ourselves, very much to what you were just saying, Morgan. And I'd love, Morgan, if maybe you could start us off by, how did HR end up here as the owner and knower and expertise of all the things?
Yeah. So I think it's a very sort of classic, kind of the tale as old as time. HR is feeling the squeeze and we're kind of getting the squeeze, right? I think there's this natural feeling that because we're HR, we get people, we get process, like we should just be able to do it all. And I don't necessarily think that's the truth. I think that we should stand proudly on what we do know and where we are experts. But you're right, we're getting this big pull of be strategic. Let's think about the big picture, but we need you to execute, right? That age old, like deliver with less, right? More with less, go, 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 but slow down enough because we need all of these things. And so I think we've sort of gotten here because we've been bogged down with needing to know all the details, needing to know all the ins and outs, needing to be the person that is kind of in the weeds, where really we should be able to take that step back and think about, okay, who are those experts? Who are the people that we're pulling on? How are we leading conversations and training about sales development without talking to the sales folks, right? We should not be curating all of the content without being a subject matter expert. So I think, again, we get back into this space of we're supposed to know it all. People are looking to us like we should know it all. We should be able to do it all. And we're getting lost in some of those weeds.
Yeah. And I think it's not surprising then that I hear from a lot of other practitioners and leaders that they end up with this sense of imposter syndrome, because we can, in an 8-hour day, be compensation experts, manager development experts, generalists on, getting stuff in our HRIS systems. And now we've got to navigate leave and have to know, what is leave like in California, actually in San Francisco, actually in this particular county. Now I need to jump into a leadership meeting and be super strategic. If that doesn't feel real for you, then bless you. But I think that's just where we end up.
I think you're so right. And I think where we come back to and where we'll probably spend some time today is I think more than ever, we are finding that there is a very clear gap between education, training, enablement, empowerment. And it's really, how are we going to help bridge that gap? And I think we all know this, and we'll keep talking about, is managers are key. They're key to that enablement. They have to be the extension of us and those eyes and ears in an organization.
The main thing I'd add to that as well is, by the time it gets like prioritized by key stakeholders, you needed training yesterday. And that's not quite how learning works, to just dive in and suddenly push everybody through these rapid trainings. So it's not an easy pickle to be in.
Well, and it ends up leading to very tactical, short-term, nearsighted solutions, because you have pressure from executives to make people better at this one skill yesterday. But that's actually not looking at the holistic view. And Yen, you probably have a lot of insight here from the work you did with Kona on, why do managers matter to HR and what we are doing? Like, we know that they're part of engagement, but what is that deeper connection between our two roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can take an engagement survey perhaps as a great example here. You get a report back on how your culture and organizational health is doing. And I think it's a misnomer to see HR. Oftentimes, key stakeholders will look at HR and be like, okay, fix it. It's your job to own culture. That's not quite how organizations work. Everybody at the organization owns culture. And the best way to kind of look at your culture players and your key stakeholders in that front are that middle layer. And so managers are often seeing the front lines of exactly who's discontent, what's happening, why performance is dropping. And they're your key, they're your opening into accessing wide swaths of the organization and having wider impact as a whole. Unfortunately, also, when we say do more with less, very few of us can afford an awesome consultant that comes in and fixes all of our problems. So if we're going to DIY that, we really need to get managers on board and be that kind of strategic lever that we can pull.
We do, exactly. I think, we talk about this a lot at 15.5, but everything you are trying to do from the people function and strategic is unlocked by your managers and their enablement and their development. There is nothing that we can do in terms of culture and people and priorities without their alignment, without their buy-in, without their excitement about what we are doing. And Morgan, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about diagnostics and measuring. And I'd love for you to give some insight here on how do we actually figure out what to prioritize, right? It can feel just like this, like we are in the middle of an ocean and there are 10,000 sharks swimming around us, like I'm the most important. How do you figure out which one you've got to battle first?
Yeah. And so here's the other interesting thing. As HR, and I say this again from my own experience, we're also looked at to be the data experts. And there is a level that we have to be. We have to be comfortable being able to look at the data, tell the story, find those pockets. And so that's really where I spend most of my time meeting with hundreds of our customers to talk about results that they're seeing either in an engagement survey, their best stuff review. How are you pulling this all together? How does it combine with retention? And honestly, you can get lost in the weeds. You can feel super intimidated because you're not a math and numbers for that person. I think, again, I'll admit I had to take remedial probability and stats. It wasn't my strong suit. What you can do, though, is start to find pockets, start to find sort of trends and themes that you're seeing, really finding intentional focus on particular areas. So sort of start at that 30,000 foot view. Let's go to about 10,000. Let's go down to about 2,500. And to your point, Karina, let's get out of like the circling of the sharks in the ocean and create that tide pool. What are we focusing on? Where are the pockets that are doing things really, really well? And let's figure out what's happening there. Let's find a pocket where maybe things aren't going so well. Our diagnostics, our engagement survey, low performance is showing up, right? Ineffective managers, if we're using a manager effectiveness survey. And it's really going to help us kind of create this cohort or a triangulation of where to focus, really creating a very targeted approach instead of doing this, hey, I have this whole ocean here and I don't know where to focus. Let's kind of narrow in, find, like I said, a common theme, a common kind of thread throughout, and let's focus there. Honestly, too, that can help your own imposter syndrome, your own sense of confidence. So instead of trying to be the expert everywhere, let's kind of come together. The last thing I'll say, though, is, and I hear this often, yeah, but then not everybody needs everything. You're right. So you could be looking at upskilling in effective feedback. Your pockets that are going really, really well, maybe you're tapping them to be the influencers, to be the expert in the room, to share their stories. Then you're looking at those that maybe aren't doing it so well and need a little extra TLC. And let's think about it like a college course. Let's pull them out and do kind of a group study off to the side. Let's give them a little extra TLC based on what we're seeing and hearing. So I think, again, as we can take it from this like big ocean to a tide pool and being more targeted, it's going to help you and it's going to help those that you're enabling and that you're training.
Yeah, and you said something so important there, Morgan, about, right, we think about these blanket trainings that we do that, okay, I have 350 managers in my company. Let's just all do a feedback training. Well, if you do that, the likelihood that you're going to get a result from any amount of that group is really small because you actually haven't looked and seen what are their needs, what are their experience, is that what they're actually good at? Is that what they're struggling at? Does that matter to their employees? Is that what's hurting or helping their engagement? Whereas when you start to look at a data set, like you had mentioned, an engagement survey, and then you start cutting by different attributes. So now let me look at a function that's really important to my company's goals, engineering. Let me look at a segment of managers that we just promoted. Now I can start to kind of cut and see how are they doing, what's happening within their teams. Or, if you have the tools or capability to see like a view where certain groups are having a harder time with engagement, certain groups are struggling, you can just start going on that journey to really, really find what groups need your help. Some people need feedback training, some people don't. Some people need help with prioritization, strategic decision making, aligning people around teams. Someone actually might need that well-being training. So you've got to make sure you know what that group needs if you actually want the real result. And I love that. I love that you brought that up, Morgan. So, right, we know we've done the diagnostics. We've started in that part. We have the right data. We've looked at our population. We figured out, okay, I want to look at first-time engineering managers who've been at the company for less than 3 years. That's the group I really care about. Now what? Like, how do we actually bring a meaningful training to life and not overwhelm ourselves, go back and get lost in the weeds? Yen, I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on this kind of one-size-fits-all training programs versus doing something really specific and how you've seen that work or not work for different companies.
I love the points that have been brought up so far. As far as we have to first understand that managers are some of the busiest people at your organization. They have a million things to do and then training on top of that. And so when you do offer a blanketed solution, it's potentially the most convenient solution for you to start planning out as a short-staffed and short-handed HR team. But what you're really telling your managers is this is an optional generalized training. I have not really paid attention to what you actually need. And for all future trainings, this may not be relevant for you, but I'm going to force you to do it. And that is essentially a way to kill the learning culture that you might be trying to develop at your organization. On the actual side of HR, it's actually not the most convenient thing for you to be rolling out either. If you potentially have 5 HR folks and no L&D person, if you're suddenly wearing that L&D hat, or you do have some L&D folks, but you're the one L&D person at your organization, being expected to roll out a corporate level, fully fledged L&D program from scratch, a manager one-on-one program, multiple sessions, multiple modules, multiple weeks of content, that is already an entire quarter's worth of work and then some. And then essentially you have to ship that within 1 to 2 months. It's a recipe for burnout. And any L&D professional who's been in that boat can tell you that is not only burnout, it's not only ineffective, but it's also not a great use or realistic for the resources that you have on hand. So we really need to think, what are the key problems that certain cohorts need solved? What are the skills that they're really missing? And how can I make it so the engineering directors at our organization learn how to have career conversations? And what would that look like? Does it have to look like traditional sit through an entire module type of learning? Or can we make it more dynamic for the subject and the cohort that we're trying to target against?
Exactly. I love that. Morgan, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, Ian, one of the things you were talking about, and I often talk to our customers on, and I know in my previous world, we talked a lot about this, is this idea that learning is sort of a 70-20-10 model, right? About 70% of your learning is on the job, in the flow, how are things going? 20% is really around sort of coaching, mentoring, going to your own advisory board to say, hey, I'm learning how to do this. How would you handle this situation? And really only about 10% is formal, right? We also have to take into account that we all learn differently. We've got visual learners, we've got auditory learners, you've got folks like myself that needs a really clear syllabus when everything is due. You have someone else that just wants to learn in their own time. And I think that's also an added layer to like, how do you make sure that you're meeting the needs of those in which you're enabling and who you're training? So I think you're spot on. Just saying, hey, everybody's attending this training and that's it, is really sort of obtuse of us as HR leaders to say, because we're not going to listen to them. We're not going to cater. Now, let's also say there's the flip side that we can't cater to every little thing, to every little person. So how do you start to find those cohorts or those pockets where you want to be able to spend time? There's also, and I might talk about this later a little bit, is this idea of piloting, right? It's okay to pilot and pivot. It's okay to pilot something and realize we're not seeing results. How do we want to change, right? Or, hey, this is actually more effective than I thought it was because I've been targeted. on a specific learning journey or a specific cohort. And now let's replicate that somewhere else.
Yeah, I actually think we often get stuck in the people function and a very just traditional mindset of we've got to have one program that's right for everybody and we're going to own it and we can't say that it wasn't right versus sometimes I think it was just more of like a product or a design mindset of let's gather data, let's find the group that actually matters most to engagement. Not everybody, but what do we really care about doing this year? Let's make a hypothesis. What do we think will work? What do we know from experience, from information that we can gather and try and be a little bit more agile and say, yes, this was great. This was like wonderful. Here's what we could do differently, or, how can we make this better next time? And also take some of that pressure off ourselves that every single thing we do has to be an A+ 100% right out the gate the first time. That is not and shouldn't be the expectation for us. It's not how great programs or great organizations are run.
Tired of high turnover costs draining your resources? 15Five's performance management platform helps you find and act on employee turnover risk before it's too late. From continuous feedback loops to manager coaching and training that improves role clarity, recognition, and retention. Learn more at 15five.com or click the link in the show notes.
I heard the other day this idea around curating, not recreating, right? So again, being able to know, like, what are your resources out there? There's amazing books and literature and world-class resources. Don't start from scratch, right? How do you mold it? How do you shape it? That there helps you weigh cost, time, value. How are you bringing the picture together? So I think there's, again, this level of what are we looking to target? How do we want to make an impact? And then what are the right resources? How do you prioritize building from scratch versus perhaps borrowing, right? Buying and enhancing to your specific issue or your specific organization.
Yeah. And I'm curious if you have thoughts there too on should HR be buying? Should they be building? What's a good kind of guiding light for folks to know when is the right time for what solution?
Yeah, it's a very personal kind of question to every single organization. High level manager development, I like to compare to Taco Bell, same ingredients across the board. You put your little spin on it with your values, company expectations, and maybe some favorite frameworks that you really want to hinge all of these different programs around. When it comes to build or buy, however, you really have to look at the resources available to you. Are you operating with zero L&D budget? Then buy is pretty much not on the table. And we really have to get strategic about what we're building, what frameworks we're using, because then time is the resource in question at that point. If you have a little bit more of an L&D budget, but really strict time, maybe you have to deliver this L&D program rapidly, let's borrow. You can of course, buy certain types of programs, but let's make sure that we're borrowing from frameworks that people maybe have already studied or have already had some chatter around, and let's make it so we're not having to completely reinvent the wheel. There are so many awesome L&D folks. If you connect with me on LinkedIn and you have some questions, I'm more than happy to introduce you to many of them, but we've all had to do the exact same thing. Unfortunately, it's a space that's incredibly siloed, so nobody's hiding their secrets, but it's really hard to kind of understand that everybody is essentially seeing the same thing unless you study this for a living. And by the way, everybody's doing the same thing pretty much.
Yes, they are. And I think we forget too how often people are willing to share and coach and be mentors. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask someone, even if their answer is no, or I don't have the time. You might learn even just one little thing or get one tip that helps you and guides you to the right point. I think that's such a great thing to remember. And, coming back to all the data and analysis, I know that for a lot of folks in HR, they're just starting to build that skill set, right? That hasn't been a key component of strategic HR. It really is now, and it's going to be much more in the future. But if you look at your data and you know that there is a real serious issue that you have got to close, it is deeply impacting engagement, you think it's really going to cause your business to miss its goals, miss milestones, or not achieve its revenue, go and try to make the pitch for budget if you don't have it. Again, even if your answer is no, don't let that stop you. If you have a good story that you can put together and say, hey, this would mean something to us. Can we get money for it? Why not ask? Very much in the Michael Jordan, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Remove that fear and have that little bit of confidence in yourself. Take confidence from the three of us behind you saying you can do it, you can try, which I would love for us to actually talk a little bit about building the business case. I think that's a really important part of getting the buy, right? We can't actually do the trainings or bring managers in unless the business is really behind us. So, right, we think about kind of simple, scalable, targeted development. We know that makes the difference. Like we measured and we got a diagnostic, checking that box. We found the right group to target, checking that box. We didn't overcomplicate our training. We either reached out and got some resources. We have a little bit of budget. We're going to go to someone that we trust or someone that we think is a great fit. Awesome. So now we need to build the case and measure impact. That is the bow on the present, the cherry on the sundae. None of this stuff before matters if you don't actually have the business story behind you and can measure if this is going to make a difference to your company or not, right? So I want y'all to think about a little bit for a second in this pull manager enablement. How easily can you all tie manager enablement right now to your company goals? That's a big starting point. So I'm curious to see where people land. And as we hear those answers, I want us to, think about, and Yen, you talked about this a little bit before, kind of investing in manager development and how we can think about it as more of a business decision, less of an HR decision, right? Or just an HR initiative. How do we elevate that strategy and that why behind manager enablement?
Absolutely. I want to get very precise about the diction that we're using. Oftentimes, development, training, I'll be very real. It's not something that immediately people hear and they're like, I want to throw budget at that, even though it's the exact same thing. Sometimes even using words or intentions like enablement and driving the ability to deliver or the ability to perform, that itself frames your business case in maybe a more friendly way for an executive who isn't as learning minded or prioritizing learning to digest. You having those cohorts, that data and that precision to essentially say, this is the precise metric that we're trying to move, and this is how us investing in managers in this precise skill over this time and having a remeasurement moment, that packaging allows you to not just have a L&D program that's there and that's nice to have and that has no clear ROI. So from the get-go, from the moment you identify that this is a need, we really want to make sure that you're constantly tying to one engagement driver, one type of metric inside your performance reviews or your surveys. Really make sure that you're able to understand what success looks like and make sure that that maintains as your North Star as you go. It's really challenging to essentially be in the position to defend why people deserve development, why they deserve resources. And it does feel like a duh, don't we care about people kind of moment. But unfortunately, in tight budgets and also tight resources, we do have to have numbers to back up our hunches and to make sure that we're able to defend the programs that we know will be best for our people.
Yeah, exactly. I often tell other leaders, right? If you were coaching an executive and they wanted to go to the C-suite table with a proposal, you would probably coach them, go with data. You need to go with it. You've got to back up what you're saying. You can't just walk in blindly. We've got to model that, and we can't walk in there either. Now, I know a lot of us also in the HR function face just skepticism, even when you've done the right thing. You got the numbers, you've got the story, you're there in the conversation. You've got that one leader who just doesn't want to do it. They have whatever, they had an experience. I'm the best C-suite leader and I've never been trained. Like you're in that conversation. It's like, well, we got to get through this. Morgan, how have you navigated yourself or coached customers to get through that skepticism?
We've all been there, right? Where we've listened to the leader that's like, this isn't important, but I think it is. So a couple of things. I think our value in HR as HR leaders is exactly what Yen's talking about. It's bringing not only the culture side of it, but also the context. And oftentimes that context is in business numbers, metrics, et cetera. To be honest, I think another really tactic, if you will, is finding those that do believe, right? I once kind of got this advice, and I might get it wrong because it's been a while, but before you go to the meeting, you should be able to know who you're having your meeting with and who you've already had a meeting with. So oftentimes you're getting the buy-in from someone else and they are helping to speak on your behalf. So again, I think when we think about these areas of finding a cohort, really getting another leader to sort of see that ROI already, that can then influence the remaining amount of, leaders across the board. So, finding who your supporters are, who your influences are in and at the table with you. So not that they're going to talk entirely on your behalf, but if they've already seen the investment, they've been able to see a positive impact, they can tell the story in their own terms. It's also going to help you along the way, especially for that super skeptical person that's sitting across from you. It doesn't probably matter how often you're going to say it, but if others are saying it around you, they're going to start to listen at some point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think adding to your point, Morgan, it's not just HR that's pushing for development opportunities. Development is an investment in your people. And we've seen VPs of sales say, hey, my sales managers, they're not showing our career pathways. I'm going to lose our top performers. That's really going to hurt our ability to deliver. We can translate these development opportunities towards people staying. And you're not the only person that sees that at the organization.
Exactly. And it's so different, right? Because you might have a leader who's 10 steps ahead of you and is like, I'm looking at my engagement data from the last 4 surveys and I'm committed to this. What do we do? Like they're almost your champion and you're really just supporting and giving them the right resources to go ahead versus sometimes we're starting from the very beginning of getting everyone on board. One thing you said, Morgan, that reminded me of an experience I had at a company a few years ago is we were rolling out a long-term manager enablement program, but also at the same time rolling out a decision-making framework, which I'm a big fan of decision-making frameworks. And one of my favorite things about this was it was very clear from the get-go that our CEO was making the decision on this manager program, and he had already signed off on it. So by the time we got to the table with all the other executive leaders, it wasn't actually a question of, are you going to do it or not? It was an informed. We are doing this, and this is the expectation. And so for leaders who would have generally come there to say, I can't do this, I don't have the time, it's not a priority, everybody's boss just said it is. So if you want to pick it up with them, you're welcome to, but otherwise we're moving ahead. Like this is the decision getting on board. So depending on where your company at, again, find those people who can really help you and really, really drive this message forward. I'm curious too, from either of you, from both of your experiences, just thinking about measuring effectiveness of programs, right? You had said this at the beginning, and right, we have to be able to show then after that we've done this program, it actually made a difference. What are some of the things that you think work well or really tie that story together to show a progression of change or development, knowing that we're tackling behaviors that aren't an overnight change?
Yeah, I think first, overnight is a key word there. We have to be realistic about the type of change that we're going to see. And a lot of these behaviors, especially the squishy behaviors that drive manager excellence, they're things that take time to develop. People don't just become really great at difficult conversations or feedback overnight. And so we can look for leading indicators. And if you Google the Kirkpatrick model, it's a really great evaluation, like pyramid essentially with 4 levels: reaction, learning, impact, results. So maybe immediately after a webinar or some sort of event wraps, we don't really know if we have results just yet, but we can measure reaction, we can measure attendance, and we can also eventually quiz folks and do remeasurement opportunities to see if they have picked up and started to show signs of behavior change. We can also talk to our HRBPs or anybody that's really on the ground working with these managers to see if they're seeing less fires, less blowups, and less headaches over time as managers are navigating these a little bit better. And over time, what we're ideally seeing is more mentions of key frameworks that we're really trying to hone in on folks, more instances and examples of positive behavior over time, and tying all of that to a bottom line revenue improvement or what have you, that is showing that these efforts have really paid off. It takes time, it takes experimentation, and it really takes a dedication to continuously hold managers to these frameworks when they already have a million other things to be focused on. But that is the best way that you can be essentially moving the needle on these different types of metrics and organizational health indicators.
I love that. That's great. Morgan, what about for you? What would you add to that?
Ditto to everything that you just said. Yeah. And I think there is a very sweet sort of balance. And I think we've talked about this, and it's not always just training, because in our mind, training tends to feel like a one-time effort, or you go in, you get it done, you get out. But it's how are you continuing over time? And so I think there's a sweet balance between moving too quick, not giving enough time to allow learnings to kind of be used and implemented, and then sort of remeasured. And so I think, again, when we think through this, it's being able to be very clear, and we've talked about this in our diagnostic of who and what we're looking to impact. What is it tied to? Is it tied to performance? Is it tied to engagement? Is it tied to a manager effectiveness? Is it tied to sales? Whatever that metric is, it's then giving the time to upskill, to learn, holding accountability, reinforcing, coming along the ways. And I love what you said, even Yen, of having some anecdotal along the way. And then it's that remeasurement. Again, HR leaders to me have that balance of both culture and context. And oftentimes that context are your metrics, are your things like the ROI. Are you seeing an increase in sales? Are you seeing that increase in engagement? The culture is the things that you're going to start to see. Do your folks appear happier? Are they showing up? Are they, involved more? Those are the things that you're going to see over time. I love even the mention of you're going to start to hear frameworks used, right? And they become kind of common nomenclature throughout your leaders.
It's why it's so important too to make sure that you are measuring then, whether it's engagement or manager effectiveness, or your metrics are on a regular basis, right? If you do it once a year, you're waiting a really long time to be able to understand if, again, is your program on the right track or not? And are you seeing any signs that it's working, right? Thinking about even ways that you can get lightweight measurement, touch points. We all know that people have survey fatigue, but if people understand the why behind what we're doing and the questions we're asking, I think, again, we would be surprised that people are willing to give us the feedback of this is why it matters to the business, to you as an employee, you as a manager, help us know if we're on track or not.
Absolutely. And I would say no L&D program should be seen as a one and done solution. You don't just launch something in Q2 2024 and then never revisit it again. L&D is about continuous reinforcement to drive that behavior change. So look for that remeasurement opportunity and try to figure out what's next. Make sure that you constantly have some support system for managers because there's always areas for people to grow in. It's a very hard thing to get right.
And a lot of people can get stuck too in the tactics of what we have to do with managers. We got to answer a lot of questions and direct them. Spend a day, give yourself some time to think about where are you actually putting your energy in the most strategic parts of manager enablement. If your answer right now is, I'm creating Google Docs and updating our intranet, think about what you can do to shorten your time there. Are there tools you can use in AI, other resources, internal people who you can leverage so you can actually put your time and energy into the things that are really going to make a difference? Because we all know the tactical stuff has to happen, but there's so many things available at our fingertips now for free that don't even cost you or your people budget anything that'll really take that lift off of you and allow you to dig into the work that's frankly, like more fulfilling for most of us and more exciting. That's where we get to grow. Like we support other people's growth, but we got to think about our own too.
Yeah, I think there's also a level here too. Yanyan, you said something around that kind of constant, right? There needs to be that consistent. One thing that I think we often forget about is use the avenues in which we already have, right? Chances are most of your departments are having manager meetings, right? They're having some sort of sync. Leverage those, show up. Don't wait to say, hey, I'm rolling out this entire formal program and I'm going to wait 6 months to bring you back. No, like get on that calendar, have a standing, and then show up prepared and ready, right? Don't say no to it. If someone says, hey, Morgan, do you want to come to your, yes, I do actually. Here's the place that you can come in and reinforce. Here's the place that you can showcase what's happening from an organizational standpoint. And so I think there's that level and lever that we can pull as well, because we're like, we don't want to take business. They're probably talking strategy. Guess what? They're people.
It's a strategy.
It's a strategy. It's a strategy. So I think that's other way where we think about we're already so strapped thin, so on our leaders, so on our managers. If it's time already carved out on their calendars, we should be utilizing and capitalizing that as well.
Yes, progress, not perfection. Remember, in the spirit of keeping it simple, focusing on the right thing, just try it. Better than nothing.
I always call it pilot, pivot, prove. And listen, I'm a recovering perfectionist, right? I think it's been ingrained in me, but like there is an element of just try it, right? Just try it. Let's not overanalyze it. Let's not try to have every little detail right and every, I dotted, T crossed. Try it. Put it out there. Pilot
This is not your high school AP bio class. We're not looking for 100% plus. We're looking for movement, efforts, data-backed strategies and hypotheses. That's what matters. So yeah, to all the recovering perfectionists out there, there's one question I want to tackle before we wrap things up here, which is thinking about, we talked a little bit about skeptical managers and how to tackle them. I'm curious for input from you two on a manager who's just really disconnected, like not even skeptical, but like just completely removed from the reality of who they are and what they are doing and how they're leading, how you've helped them see the light.
If you are familiar with the product adoption curve, you have your early adopters and your late adopters, folks that don't really want to hear about it. We can think of learning programs or any program at that matter on the kind of curve, and it's a bell curve essentially. So your early adopters are actually a minority of the folks. They're the people that are teachers' pets, hand raising, etc. When we're trying to look at these programs and make them successful, we really have to make sure that we basically pivot or pilot it in different types of iterations. Your very first pilot actually could be a proof point that gets those later adopters and maybe those prickly pears to actually see the value of what's happening and see how cool it is to be able to have access to, I don't know, group coaching, peer-to-peer learning, some sort of resource that they're able to touch on and see those improvements happening. Sometimes they literally just do not want to hear it from HR. They want to hear it from somebody else. They want to see the proof points with their own eyes. And that's what's necessary for them to kind of take the leap into the pool. So it's okay that not everybody is on board. However, oftentimes your later folks inside that bell curve are the folks who need training the most. So we really need to make sure we have visible social proof points, actual data, and we can start to get those folks warmed up into diving in.
Exactly. There's a difference in letting them continue to believe that until they come around versus not doing anything at all for them. And if y'all are seeing the let them theory everywhere take over all of the things, I think that's one area where sometimes it's okay to be like, you know what, that's okay if you have a gap. I've given you the data, I've given you the proof. Some people just need to go on that journey to get there. And it doesn't have to be right in that moment in your first conversation. Just remember, don't give up. I want to be thoughtful about our time here and wrap things up. First, thank you so much, Yen and Morgan, for taking time to be with us today and really share your insights and expertise. I think we could have gone on for much, much longer, but it was so incredible to be able to hear from your experiences to help all of us in HR and in people, L&D, enablement, business strategic functions, figure out how we actually make a dent in manager enablement and really move the needle on engagement, performance, and retention. For everyone, please just remember as you walk away from today, start with data, understand your diagnostic, don't boil the ocean, find your tide pool, do the best with the resources you have, and measure your impact always. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
When it comes to manager effectiveness, where should you focus your time and budget? How can you tell the difference between an effective manager and an ineffective one? And how can you replicate the success of a good manager at scale? If you find yourself asking these questions a lot, you're in luck. We wrote this guide to help you answer those questions and offer practical tips and tools that can help you measure key talent metrics, improve manager effectiveness, and create a continuous learning environment for your managers. We'll drop a link in the show notes for you to check out.